Hello, U.S. history students. Welcome in. We got lesson 3.5 here about the Compromise of 1850. What this is really about is a crisis where we recognize that this slavery situation has got the country in a really, really bad place, and we are going to try our darndest to hold it together. But the turbulence is getting shakier and shakier, and it's just looking increasingly like something terrible like the Civil War calamity might be just over the horizon. So as we get to the tail end of Unit 3, and like I said, Unit 3 is going to lead us right up to the Civil War. Our long-term learning target is I can trace the path to Civil War. We are getting right into that zone here right now. So let's jump on in here with this lesson. The Compromise of 1850 is a crisis that's precipitated by the need or the desire to digest all the territory that we've just acquired in the Mexican War, right? So thank you, James K. Polk. He has, left office, and like I said last time, he died shortly after he left office, and we now have all this enormous chunk of land from Mexico as a result of that war. But the process of bringing this into the country is going to make us really, really sick. So let's explore what that means. Specifically, the territory that had the most promise and the most immediate payoff, but also is going to cause the most immediate problems, is California. So the immediate payoff had to do with the discovery of gold. Right around the tail end of the Mexican War, gold is discovered there. This is the so-called gold rush of 1848 and 49. San Francisco 49ers, that whole deal. So gold had been discovered there. Americans had made their way rapidly. There is a gold, there's a gold rush, and so all sorts of people are moving there. California reaches this sort of population threshold at which point it can sort of write up a constitution. It can apply for statehood, and they are ready to do that. And they apply for statehood, and just like what happened with Missouri in 1819 or Texas in 1836. The admission of California is going to be an issue. This time, it's not a new slave state. California's state constitution says that slavery is not practiced there. This is going to be a free state, and this would tip the balance in favor of the free states now in the United States Senate. Remember, in the Senate, all states have equal representation. So if you have an equal number of slave and free states, then no one side has leverage over the other there. Well, this is going to give leverage to the free states, and the fact of the matter is there are several free states ready to go. In fact, Minnesota is sort of standing in queue, good old Minnesota, standing in the queue right behind California, kind of looking at the watch saying, we're ready to go too, right? Anytime you just say it, you say the word, let's get going. And I believe Iowa's ready to go. Like there's states that are ready to go, and there's no slave states that are sort of at that same spot of being ready to go. Beyond that, so beyond tipping that balance, we have the fact that, like, if you recall, in 1820, when we have the Missouri Compromise, they made this, this so-called magic line, this Missouri Compromise line, and the idea was, states that are admitted north of that line in the future will be free states. States admitted south of that line will be slave states. Well, if we admit California as a free state, then we are kind of negating or avoiding that line. And, what does that mean? It's like we got rid of, there was a system. It wasn't a good system. It wasn't especially rational, but it was the system. It was the thing that kept everyone from setting their hair on fire. And if we admit California, then we're negating the system. And California's like, by the way, don't cut us in half. We want in, but on the basis of being one California. And so we are going to have this whole argument again where we're now going to add, it looks like the free states are going to get a lot more leverage over the slave states. It looks like we're throwing out the old system of the Missouri Compromise, and that means we got to have this whole argument all over again. And so it's the same thing, right? Like it's the same process where people lose it in Congress and just sort of in like the political debate in general. Henry Clay is now in his 70s, right? I mean, Henry Clay was around, before the war, around during the War of 1812, and he's still here in 1850, and he's this elder statesman now, and it's sort of like this. He's not retired, but this sense of like, I've got to do this one more time. I've got to earn this great compromiser, moniker one last time. And so Clay, the Kentuckian, begins putting together a plan along with John C. Calhoun, of course, the sort of de facto spokesman of the South, and Calhoun is really in declining health. Daniel Webster of Massachusetts, sort of a spokesman for the North. Okay, it's like just imagine these smoke-filled back rooms and people who dislike and distrust each other, but also recognize if we don't figure this out, like this country is flying apart here. So what are we going to do? And they recognize there is no way, there's no thing we can give the South that's as big as California is for the North. And then California plus Minnesota plus any other states after that. Like nothing's that big. So this is going to have to be a complicated kind of a piecemeal solution, right? We're going to have to put this in a lot of different chunks and see what we can make work. There's plenty of people in Congress who are just saying, it's over, call it what it is. This is a divorce. Like there's nothing you can offer to the South that is going to equate what it means to add California. It's just, let's just call it what it is and just walk away from each other, right? Or if that means, I mean, we don't want war, but let's end it here. During one of these confrontations, a senator pulls a loaded gun on another senator during a moment of heated debate, and you're saying, whoa, like, hold on a second. Things are reaching a point of escalation. Again, we look at like the country today in the current context, and we say, yeah, politics is loaded, it is divisive, it's contentious, it is. We have gone through worse. Now, it wasn't good. I mean, and that worse was resolved with the Civil War. So we want nothing to do with this. But it's not like, we go through, every now and again, politics gets superheated like this. It doesn't always end with the Civil War, but we've gone through superheated moments. It is unpleasant. And at a certain point, we got to find a way to back away. Now, John C. Calhoun, during all these debates and all this arguing in 1850 into 51, is in failing health. His last public action is writing this speech. His health is so poor he can't even deliver it. So again, remember, Calhoun from South Carolina, he of the nullification crisis thing a couple decades before, the states' rights guy, right? The guy who slavery is a positive good guy, like spokesman of the South. He writes the speech. It's delivered by a colleague of his as Calhoun is sitting there. Imagine him sitting there in his chair, making his John C. Calhoun face the whole time. And in this speech, he just sort of, well, let's read it. Here's an excerpt that captures the tone. He says, "There's not a single territory in progress in the southern section, and no certainty that any additional state will be added to it." Like, we can't add more slave states. We can't add more southern states. This destruction of the equilibrium. So we've had an equilibrium, and it's being destroyed now. This destruction of the equilibrium was caused by the legislation of this government, which was appointed as the common agent of all Americans. If you admit California, under all the difficulties that oppose her admission, you compel us to infer that you intend to exclude the South from the whole of the acquired territories, with the intention of destroying the equilibrium between the two sections. If you tell us that you're adding California, you are signaling to us very clearly there will be no more balance between the two sections. You intend to destroy them. And there's nothing you can give us that will be equal to that. And so Jackson just says, if this is a divorce, we're not leaving you. You're the ones leaving us. That's the end. And if there's a fault here, if there's a side that's at fault, it is the northern states that are at fault because they are the ones who are pushing for the admission of California, and they're the ones ultimately who just can't seem to live with us and our slaveholding ways in the South. You find us so morally egregious and offensive. We don't find you that way, but you find us that way, and now you're walking out and you're breaking this, and this is on you. It's not on us. It's not good. This is not good times. The Compromise of 1850 is a nice term that's, it's basically like, okay, let's piece something together here, all right? Kind of a Scotch tape deal. Scotch tape and Band-Aids and try to figure something out. Clay gives it his very best, all right? The idea is his, of like, we're going to have multiple bills and put this together and make this happen. Clay's health begins to falter. Again, he's just in declining health. It's not his fault. His health begins to falter. And the initiative for this is picked up by an ambitious young senator named Stephen A. Douglas. Stephen A. Douglas is a senator from Illinois, so a northern or a free state, a Midwestern state. Douglas is a Democrat. Douglas has major ambitions and designs on being president, like most senators do then and now. And so Stephen A. Douglas sees this as his opportunity to put his name on the map and to make himself, he hopes in certain ways palatable to Northerners and Southerners for a future presidential run. But in order to earn that, he's going to have to sort of push through all these different components of this compromise in order to make this happen. So let's talk about what happens. All right. If we just go through this chart here on the side first, all right, that's the big piece. And I highlight three that we really need to know for the purposes of our course. California admitted to the Union as a free state. That is the single biggest piece of anything here in the Compromise of 1850. That is a massive victory for the North. That is a massive piece of leverage that they will have. This idea of popular sovereignty, which I'll talk about in 1 second, will be used to determine the rest of that territory. The rest of that territory for Mexico will use popular sovereignty to decide north or south. Okay, we'll talk about what that means. And at the bottom, strong enforcement of a new Fugitive Slave Act. That's what the South is going to get. That is like, okay, here's the South, we're going to offer you this. And this is going to be loaded up for you as a way to sort of capture fugitive slaves, or people who you say are fugitive slaves anyway. And we'll learn about that. Okay, so that's like the three big pieces to know about it. Let's back up. California, you get that, what that means. Popular sovereignty. Stephen A. Douglas says, okay, so if we admit California, then you're right. We're getting rid of the old magic line thing. That system is gone. The new system will be this. Let the people vote for it. This is Stephen A. Douglas sort of trying to be a little clever here, right? Like, look, who's to say? Who's to say if slavery is right or wrong? I don't want to necessarily have to give my opinion because I want to run for president, right? So I'm going to sort of, shrug my shoulders on the moral question of slavery. Gosh, I don't know. And instead I'll just say, how about this? Why don't you vote on it? Let the people in those territories, when they're ready for statehood, let's let the people in those territories vote themselves on whether they want it to be slave or free. And that will be the new system. That way, great news, fellow congressmen, we don't have to vote on it. We don't have to put our names on the line. We don't have to do that controversial thing. We get to kind of pass the buck, so to speak. And who are we passing the buck to? Well, the great American public. And we'll just say to the public, why don't you vote whether you want it to be slave or free? And maybe that will work, right? So it's like it's a slippery political thing. It's definitely Stephen A. Douglas saying, I want to sort of be palatable to both Northerners and Southerners and sort of appear like a moderate here on this. And he's thinking, and it gets us out of this crisis, right? This will be the new system to replace the old magic line. Okay, fine. And we'll talk about the Fugitive Slave Act in a second. And so this Compromise of 1850, when you're looking at a map, it's like, okay, in green here, California dings onto the map. Look out, right? Minnesota Territory is ready to rock and roll pretty soon. We will be added to the Union in 1858. And as for these two areas in salmon, or whatever color you want to say that is, the rest of that territory from Mexico, great news, Congress. We don't have to decide. We don't have to argue that out between North and South right now. We'll just put it up for a vote later on down the road and let the people decide, and whatever the people decide will be the right answer, I guess. When you look at it as a whole and this Compromise of 1850, it's like it's an attempt to kind of de-escalate things and bring some calm back. It also, if you're saying, so overall, what's the plan for dealing with slavery? I think it should be clear to you, there is no plan. It's just sort of like every now and again, a new crisis breaks out. And by the 1850s, that a new crisis seems to be happening every couple years. In the past, maybe you got like a decade of rest between some like hair on fire argument about slavery, but it's just going to keep happening. There is no plan. It's just like every time we're going to try and improvise, and maybe someone like Henry Clay is around to pull a rabbit out of a hat, and we can invent Maine, or we can think of popular sovereignty as a way to solve this, but there is no plan, right? It's discouraging, right? And at the moment it passes, it feels like, well, maybe we got through it again. Maybe the worst is over. Maybe this will allow things to kind of calm down. It's going to prove that that's not the case. Let's talk about this Fugitive Slave Law. So this is what the South, what Southerners who are pounding their table saying, if we have to swallow California, then you'd better give us something really good. And here's what they got. This is a new federal law. All right, so it's more powerful than any state law that backs up and reinforces Southerners' ability to collect, to search out and collect slaves who've escaped or people who the Southerners claim are escaped slaves, even if those slaves are in free states, even if those slaves have made it to the North. So it authorizes for slave hunters. How about that term? Right, that is grotesque. Slave hunters. It says these slave hunters are not bound by northern laws, whether they're in a northern state or not. So a slave hunter in New Jersey, let's say, or Massachusetts, doesn't have to sort of abide by local state laws. They are sort of, in a sense, a kind of a federal marshal or a federal law enforcement agent. These slave hunters will have a description of an escaped slave, about 6 feet tall, answers to the name of whatever, Bob, or whatever it says, right? And last known to be in this particular city, and they'll go around, whatever they're doing to find someone. They grab someone, they corral that person up, and they say, you are this escaped slave who had escaped from, I don't know, who'd escaped from Virginia, and I'm bringing you back. And the slave hunter is able to then bring this slave before a federal marshal or a federal agent, and this federal agency is established by the Fugitive Slave Act. The slave hunter can present whatever evidence they have. I don't think the slave got a chance to speak for themselves. The federal agent then makes a ruling, this is the slave, an escaped slave, or this is a free man. Now here's the key. If they ruled that this is an escaped slave, that agent got paid a certain fee for their services there. And that fee was, I forgot the number, but let's say it's $500. If that judge ruled that person in question was not an escaped slave, they are just an actual free black person living in the North, they got, let's say, $300 or $250. They got paid less to rule that was not a slave, not an escaped slave. So there's actually a financial incentive to rule that like any person that's brought before them is an escaped slave, whether they are or not, which meant if you're a black person living in the North, look out, because you can get grabbed by these slave hunters and dragged before some federal agent or some federal judge, and they've got a financial incentive to say you are an escaped slave and send you back into a life of slavery, whether you had ever been a slave or not. If you're a Northerner who opposes slavery, and you know someone in your church, let's say, who had been an escaped slave or who escaped from slavery 10 years ago, and they can demonstrate that you knew about that and you didn't report it, you can be thrown in jail. And so all people who know about the location of escaped slaves are required by law now under this Fugitive Slave Act to report that. And if you don't, you can get punished. This is taking the grim ugliness of like sort of literally humans hunting other humans, that like up close awfulness, moral awfulness of slavery, and it's putting it right in Northerners' backyards. And in a way, it's sort of like, hey, free state or not, you're going to see slave hunters, right? And you're going to see people who are sort of on the prowl for these escaped slaves, whether they're escaped or not. This creates more and more anti-slavery agitation in northern states and among Northerners. They're saying, I hate this, right? Or they resent this. This inflames abolitionist sentiment in the North. So for Southerners, they're saying, good, we can get our property, and the federal government will back us up on this finally. Do us a favor. But for Northerners, it has an inflaming effect of agitating anti-slavery sentiment. This problem is not going away, ladies and gentlemen. So it's fair to say, crisis averted on the Compromise of 1850, not quite. That's where we're at. So before we meet again, which for some of you is tomorrow, for some of you is the day after that, please finish up your Unit 3 digital scrapbooks. Our Unit 3 exam is coming up soon, so please get these scrapbooks done. That is it. Thank you so much for your good work today, guys, and we'll talk soon.